In this video, we'll discuss the development of pituitary and its function and different hormones and some of the developmental disorders of the pituitary gland. So, where from the pituitary gland develops? The anterior pituitary develops from the Redke's pouch of the pharyngeal mucosa, and posterior pituitary develops from the neuroectoderm as an extension of the hypothalamus. So this is the anterior pituitary or adenohypophysis and the posterior pituitary neurohypophysis. What's the location of the pituitary gland? It lies in the Sella trachea, which is a part of the sphenoid bone and is covered by a dural fold known as diaphragma Selli. How pituitary is connected to the hypothalamus? It's connected to the hypothalamus via a pituitary stalk or infundibulum, and it has two pathways: a neural pathway also known as hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract and a vascular pathway or hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system of veins. And what's a portal system? The vein from one structure or organ divides in another structure and supplies into that organ. The hepatic portal vein being the other portal vein pathway. And what the vascular pathway brings? The vascular pathway, the portal system of veins, brings the anterior pituitary release an inhibitory hormone from the hypothalamus. Which of the pituitary hormones are protein in nature? ACTH, GH and prolactin are protein hormone, whereas TSH, LH and FSH are glycoprotein in nature. What the other hormone anterior lobe produces? The anterior lobe also produces beta lipotropin. And what's beta lipoprotein? The beta lipotropin has endorphin and enkephalins that binds to opiate receptors. And what the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract brings? It's a neural pathway, it's an external extension from the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei of the hypothalamus to the posterior pituitary gland and brings oxytocin and vasopressin or ADH. These two hormones, oxytocin and vasopressin, are produced in hypothalamus, not in the pituitary. They are only released from the pituitary gland. What are the cell types in the anterior pituitary gland? It has two types of cells, agranular and granular cells. The agranular cells are chromophobe cells and comprise the 50% of the pituitary cells, but they do not secrete any hormones. The granular cells are chromaffin cells, comprise 40% acidophilic cells and 10% of them are basophilic cells. The acidophilic cells are of two types, somatotrophs and mammotrophs. The somatotrophs produce growth hormone. The acidophilic somatotrophs produce growth hormone and the acidophilic mammotroph produce prolactin. The basophil cells, what do they produce? They produce rest of the hormones TSH, FSH, ACTH, LH, and also they produce, as I told, beta lipotropin. Which other anterior pituitary hormone has MSH like activity? ACTH has MSH like activity. That is why hyperpigmentation occurs in primary adrenal insufficiency due to adrenal disease because of excess production of ACTH. Whereas abnormal pallor is a hallmark of hypopituitarism because MSH and ACTH are not produced. What's albinism? Albinism is a congenital inability to synthesize melanin. And what's piebaldism? Piebaldism is characterized by patches of skin that lack melanin owing to congenital defects in the migration of pigment cell precursor from the neural crest during embryonic development. And what's vitiligo? Vitiligo is the same thing, is a patchy loss of melanin, but it's afterbirth and it's progressive too. What inhibitory hormone does hypothalamus produces? It produces growth hormone, inhibitory hormone, and prolactin inhibitory hormone. What are the cell types in posterior pituitary gland? The posterior pituitary has the nerve endings from the hypothalamus and it does not have a cell type. Other than these nerve endings, it has blood vessels and pituicytes. And what's pituicytes? Pituicytes are satellite cell in the posterior pituitary containing fat globules and are actually modified estroglia cells. What's the blood supply of the pituitary gland? The anterior pituitary is supplied by the superior hypophyseal artery and inferior hypophyseal artery. But the major blood supply and nutrition to the anterior pituitary is by the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system of the veins. The posterior pituitary is supplied by the inferior hypophyseal artery. And what's the median eminence? The median eminence is a part of the hypothalamus which is outside the blood-brain barrier and from which regulatory hormones are released. It connects the hypothalamus with the anterior pituitary gland via hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal vein. This is the hypothalamic neurons, neurosecretory neurons producing pituitary release inhibitory hormone, and here is the median eminence, and these are connected with the uh, portal system of veins to the anterior pituitary gland. Neurosecretory to the portal system of vein of the anterior pituitary, whereas posterior pituitary is continuous with the median eminence via the infundibulary stalk. What's pituitary dysplasia? Pituitary development requires midline cell migration from nasopharyngeal Rathke's pouch. Any midline craniofacial disorder may lead to aplastic, hypoplastic, or ectopic pituitary. Hypothalamic dysfunction and hypopituitarism may also result from dysgenesis of corpus callosum or septum pellucidum. These patients exhibit a combination of cleft palate, syndactyly, ear deformities, hypertelorism, optic atrophy, micropenis, and anosmia. What's Kalman syndrome? Kalman syndrome is a developmental hypothalamic dysfunction with olfactory bulb agenesis or hypogenesis and is due to mutation in the chromosome. The embryonic migration of gonadotrophin release hormone neurons from hypothalamic olfactory placode is prevented to the hypothalamus. Defective hypothalamic gonadotrophin release hormone synthesis that leads to decreased FSH and LH production from pituitary that ultimately leads to decrease in testosterone and estrogen production from testis and ovary. Otherwise, pituitary and gonads are normal, but hypothalamus is abnormal. There is associated anosmia or hyposmia along with decreased or absent production of gonadotrophin releasing hormone. There may be associated features of color blindness, optic nerve atrophy, nerve deafness, cleft palate, renal abnormalities, and cryptorchidism, and neurologic abnormalities such as mirror movements. So, what are the features? Clinical features are men present with delayed puberty and pronounced hypogonadal features, including micropenis due to testosterone deficiency. Females present with primary amenorrhea and failure of the secondary sexual character. So, what's the treatment for Kallmann syndrome? Since both pituitary and gonads are normal, so males are treated with human chorionic gonadotropin or testosterone, and females with cyclic estrogen and progesterone. Patient may acquire fertility, otherwise the patients are infertile. What's empty Sella syndrome? Empty Sella is often an incidental finding on MRI. The patient usually have normal pituitary function. Why? Because the surrounding pituitary rim is functional. Hypopituitarism in these patients may develop insidiously. Number 2, empty sella may also develop from CSF filling dural herniation, and this leads to silent pituitary infarct.